Today's webinar is titled, I Photograph Very Tiny Things, the Wonders of Photomicrography. Our presenter today is Professor and Associate Chair of the School of Photographic Arts and Sciences, Michael Parris. Michael joined the faculty at Rochester Institute of Technology in 1986. Since then, he has served as the Interim Chair of the School of Photographic Arts and Sciences, the Associate Chair, the Interim Chair of the Fine Art and Visual Media Programs, and Chair of the Biomedical Photographic Communications Department. Perez's expertise includes photography using a light microscope as well as biomedical photography and related technologies. He has published extensively and served as Editor-in-Chief of the Focal Encyclopedia of Photography, 4th edition. He has presented papers and imaging-related workshops all over the United States, as well as Sweden, Canada, the UK, Austria, Tanzania, the Netherlands, Germany, and Australia. He has been a member of the Biocommunications Association since 1978 and is also a member of the Ophthalmic Photographers Society. Some of his current professional activities include being one of the coordinators of the annual RIT Big Shot and the Images from Science exhibition. He has won numerous awards, including the RIT Eisenhart Award for Outstanding Teacher, the Gettner Prize presented by the RIT College of Imaging Arts and Sciences for Outstanding Work in the Graphic Arts, the 2007 Louis B. Schmidt Award presented by the Biocommunications Association for lifetime contributions to the industry, and the 2010 RIT Frank Romano Prize for Innovation in Publishing in the Graphic Arts. Michael holds a master's degree in instructional technology and bachelor's degrees in biology and biomedical photographic communications. He is also a registered biological photographer. Today, Michael will show us an invisible world, seen only with magnification, that is full of beauty and surprise. The presentation will showcase images made using a light microscope. Professor Parris will show photomicrographs of snowflakes and other samples in this richly illustrated talk. Some of his techniques and problems to be expected will be discussed. Be prepared to be impressed. And with that, Michael.
Thank you, Ron, for that very nice welcome. It's greatly appreciated to be with all of you. It's kind of odd to be at RIT today and have a room of 3 of us, but I know there's many of you out online, and I greatly appreciate your interest in my subject. You probably can assume I have a little bit of a cold, so if you have a volume on your microphone, speaker system on whatever you're watching this on, it might benefit you to turn it up a little bit. I'll do my best to keep us on track. This is a picture of me that was recently made, and I'll reference some pictures from myself decades ago, so for a little bit of humor, I always, when I present it, it's such an interactive experience. I look forward to some of the questions that you share in the chat box, and feel free, as Ron suggested, anytime during the course of the presentation to inquire about certain things. This is a tiny picture of a ruler just to give you a little bit of context. And so this is 3 millimeters of a ruler, and you know, that magnification would be about 8 or 10 times in at the camera system that I often would be photographing. And working on a light microscope, sometimes I might be photographing at life size or up to 1000x, but it's always nice to sort of see a ruler and get some context. Professionally, I make lots of pictures for various scientists and researchers and companies. This is a head of a photograph of a tapeworm, and kind of looks like a rock star in some ways with his color, and or I've just made an assumption that it's a he, but it could be a she, of course, or maybe tapeworms are unisex. And, you know, often we're looking at epithelial cells for biological reasons, or cancer cells or tumors. So these kinds of pictures might be demonstrative of things that I do for catalogs and for articles, or for various other kinds of reasons. I sometimes get asked to photograph some pretty particularly interesting subjects. This is a silver dollar, and as you can see on its date, was minted in 1804. But that's not even the beginning of the story. In 1804, the United States of America didn't mint silver dollars. So this silver dollar shouldn't exist by anybody's standards, and it was collected by a coin collector and for the last 10 years he's trying to prove that the coin is authentic. In 1802, the United States stopped making silver dollars because Spain was coming to the U.S., taking the silver dollars and bringing them back to Spain and melting them because it was worth more in silver than the dollar here in the U.S. And so this coin was representative, and there's been exhaustive study to prove if this 4 was put onto the coin later by an expert type of a counterfeiter, or whether it was really minted by some people that worked at the mint after hours. So this is the only coin that's ever been noted. So I get to photograph things like this, objects like that coin. This is, on the left side is a picture of my finger, and you'll see a little tiny dot on it, and that little tiny dot is a vespid wasp. And the adult wasp is to the right side of this series. This series of pictures was taken to show this wasp hatching from a housefly larval egg, and so spent 3 days trying to take this picture, waiting for this event to happen. Often life happens without a script, and so creating an environment and a way to make these pictures. The picture of the finger kind of begins to show the scale. Most people think of wasps as being large and maybe 3/4 of an inch in size. This particular species is very, very tiny, and it's actually a great wasp because it lives on flies, and that's always a good thing. This is the fly laying its egg. You can see the ovipositor. This was a particularly difficult picture. Flies and wasps have wings. You can't ask them to stay in place. So we had to create a localized little tiny chamber with the scientists so that much like knowing that the football game is going to be run on the football field. So you have to kind of create solutions to problems. This is a male and a female wasp making more wasps. This was a particularly fun picture to make. It's not like you might imagine, okay, ready, set, go. I had to sort of create the right conditions and find a female wasp that was particularly interested and fertile, and a male who, of course, was always, men can be like that, but we'll just move on with that subject. I showed you my picture in 2013, and I always kind of look back at what I looked like when I was starting my university studies, as so many of us did. We thought we knew what we wanted to be at 18, and I never for the wildest dreams could ever have imagined this is where I would be. At the time, I was taking all kinds of pictures, like many people, of things that were readily in front of them. I never really had much of an idea about working with the light microscope at this time, so landscapes and people were readily available. But when I went to college, I started taking pictures. I took a histology class, and that class really was fascinating in the way that nature was organized, and I immediately wanted to put a camera on that microscope. And so I knocked on the door of the geology department because they were the only place at Bradley University where I studied that had a photomicroscope, and it took a lot of pleading and begging and cajoling to have Dr. Foster let me have access to his microscope. These pictures are pretty awful, but it was kind of proof of concept. I joined the teaching faculty here in 1986. Again, look quite a bit different than I do in 2000 and soon to be 14. Time doesn't really wait for anybody, but I was hired to teach courses with light microscopy and biological photography, and because the faculty here is primarily an art faculty, the College of Imaging Arts and Sciences and the School of Photographic Arts and Sciences, I was constantly surrounded by artists, and they would always look at my pictures and go, "What's that?" And so began sort of this pathway of taking technical pictures and making them something else for me. It wasn't sort of a preordained expectation or destiny, it just sort of happened. So I've been making pictures of things that otherwise would maybe be science, but when viewed outside the science environment, become something totally different. So this is a fetal skull that was about the size of a quarter. I made a series of pictures and created this large map of this and made prints that are often the size of a refrigerator, which is kind of powerful to see a cat that's larger than a lion. The fetal mouse, you can begin to see the architecture of the bone and the brain and the sinuses and the tongue. This is the epiphyseal growing plates of bone. And again, with all of nature. Things are organized in certain ways. The stains that are used for these kinds of objects are used to create visibility. The colors are somewhat meaningless except to create the ability to separate one cell type from another, but I think they have a wonderful aesthetic all by themselves. This is clearly two pictures put together as one, but I like the symmetry of it. I get to teach a lot of different places. I get to lecture a lot of different places, and when I visited Sweden several years ago, there's a lot of mad cow disease and spongiform encephalopathy research that's studied, and this one researcher had human whole brains, and I just was captivated by just the aesthetic, and the staining almost reminded me of corals, and so I was able to get, she gave me one of these really wonderful brain slides that I've had a lot of fun with. Photograph live materials under the microscope. Swimming, aquatic invertebrates often used for water quality studies. These are Clostridium. These are Bursaria truncatellia. I often think of them as swimming toilet seats. These are kind of interesting pictures to make in the sense that these objects are clearly trying to get out from underneath the microscope. They have no interest in hanging around. There's a bright light shining on them. They were in a nice little warm chamber with food all around them, and I plucked them up with an eyedropper and dropped them in a drop of water in a hot microscope. So they're not certain what to do, but these two particular organisms, just by total serendipity, ended up exactly kissing underneath the objective in a sort of a way like this. These kind of pictures are impossible to choreograph. What happens, happens, and my job, I always feel, in making pictures like this is to try to minimize the variability and maximize the ability to get a good picture, but realizing there's going to be a lot of variability and things that happen, sometimes good surprises and sometimes not. The articulating surfaces of a joint, so this could be a knuckle from a fetal mammal, I presume a primate. Those are kind of impressions of astronomy. This is a recent picture I made of camel skin using a type of illumination that makes the object appear bright against the field of dark. And so this particular picture is fascinating because the researcher said that camels only have 7 sebaceous glands at each hair follicle, and in this particular tissue, she was finding 9 sebaceous glands at each hair follicle. So kind of nice to be involved with helping some science dispel a new possible hypothesis. So all of you are alums, and all of you have been to Rochester, New York, and spent numerous years of your life here walking the quarter mile, braving snow, and snow is a pretty common event in Rochester, New York. We've already had, I think, 14 inches of snow, I was told, so I've got out my microscope and tried to take a few snowflake pictures, but that didn't sort of happen anytime too quickly yet. It needs certain temperatures, and the snow comes in, enormous volumes. It can be incredibly pretty in its own way. My dogs love snow as well, so they're constant companions. But I got interested in taking snowflake pictures under the microscope a little more than a decade ago at the invitation of a student. And so Emily came back after having visited a exhibition by Wilson Bentley in Buffalo Science Center and wanted to learn how to take pictures of snowflakes under a microscope. And I told her at the minute, when I wasn't prepared to think about it, we don't do that. I don't have the right equipment. I'm not sure we can. But the following day, we decided to organize what's become somewhat of an annual event for my class, but also sort of rekindle some of the passion and interest in doing photography, not just to teach with, but as a personal hobby as well. I can't begin to share why that starts to become important for somebody that makes things that, while professionally you may do certain things, having a hobby with great passion can equally be as satisfying. So taking pictures under the microscope of snowflakes requires that you catch the flakes usually. I find that to be most helpful because architecturally they're quite tiny and fragile, so we catch them on black velvet. People that live around me on my street think I'm a little bit of a whack job running around with a cooking tray with velvet in it trying to catch the flakes as they fall. And using tiny little camel hair brushes or needles, transfer them to microscope slides. Everything has to be done outside, so it's particularly cold, and unlike people that do outdoor activities like skiing or cross-country, snowshoes, they're building up heat by being highly metabolic. I'm standing in place for more than an hour. It gets particularly cold working with these little tiny objects that on average are about 1 millimeter or smaller. My equipment isn't particularly sophisticated. I don't think that's always necessary to have super sophisticated equipment, and this is a picture of a sort of cobbled together microscope using a variety of old pieces of equipment that had been broken, and you'll notice there's some blue bags and some red bottle tops. Those all play a role in how I optically stain facets of these crystals. The ice crystals sit on these microscope slides. Sometimes they lay flat, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a sort of a dimension to them. Other times, as you might begin to think, they're only two-dimensional. You can't move them once they sit on the slide. Often they will actually break. But they do produce some incredibly interesting pictures. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to light them. There's so many facets. At this point, after 10 years or 11 years of doing this, this is sort of my epic flake, the one that's most impressive as a specimen. It seems to have a symmetry like none other that I've ever seen, and clearly very different than other types of flakes. It's a constant struggle for sharpness and placement of focus and the ability to have enough time to take these pictures. These flakes are not forever, regardless of the air temperature. When they're on a microscope, there's a light, and light is radiation, and radiation makes heat, and so there's a natural warming of the glass and then the snowflake. So they actually will begin to actually become a gas over time. This one kind of looks like a dragonfly in some way. This crystal has multiple flakes. Sometimes this happens during formation. Snowflakes form at different altitudes. Nobody really can clearly explain how the flake begins to form. They're all born on what's called a platelet. That's the sort of six-sided structure in the middle. Depending on altitude, magnetic field, moisture conditions, and temperature, then it starts to grow wings. And the wing would start to take it from a platelet to a complex flake, and the expression no two are alike is sort of because these complex flakes form in such different ways. These colors are sort of a product of interference. They're not added artificially. Maybe you can sort of visualize the oil and water at a gasoline station that creates different kind of color rainbows. These internal facets of these flakes, in some cases, just because of parallel surfaces that are very near to one another, create color. Some people argue you have to make everything perfectly sharp. In my personal work, I actually often hope that there's regions that are sharp and other regions that are not sharp, and I think that it sort of creates the essence of the object, that there's a focal point in the work, and people then can look at the regions where it has the maximum focus. So nothing is perfect ever, I've come to learn, and so my snowflakes often have regions that are not absolute. These kinds of pictures for me, I'm not trying to produce something that might be an absolute replica of the object, but in some level it's an interpretation of what I get to see for sometimes 15 or 20 seconds before the melting begins. They take on appearances like metal or glass or silver, bronze, all kinds of things. This is actually a platelet. This is incredibly small. It's about 1/10 of a millimeter. Not particularly interesting, as a crystal per se, but helps to sort of begin to understand that all snowflakes start out like that. These These are not snowflakes, these are spores, but I use this as sort of a reference picture. This is an example of what this particular spore would look like if I put white light behind it, and what the spore might look like if I were to use oblique angle dark field illumination, and you see the object in such different ways. Well, the next series of pictures is one snowflake lit in slightly different ways, beginning to show facets and surface structure and characteristics that otherwise might remain invisible without trying to emphasize. So each of these pictures has a slightly different way that I've illuminated using very tiny pieces of plastic, or inserting dark cloth underneath the object, or other ways to create shadows and highlights within the crystal itself. This isn't a time-lapse movie, but this is a flake. You can begin to see some of the natural conditions in which there's the surface moisture that's on the slide where I collect, but the minute I put it on the slide, it begins to go away. And you can see the flake get smaller just in the course of a period of time. And then, of course, it just becomes a water drop. Has a little bit of ice still in it, and then it's kind of gone. Depending on the air temperature, that process could take seconds if it's around 31 or 32, or I could get upwards of 2 minutes or 3 minutes if the air temperature is 15 or less. Not all snow is pretty. Many of you, I'm sure, go to get that ice cream out of your freezer and it has freezer burn. So this is a snowflake with freezer burn. It's a condition called rime. And rime is a constant feature in snowflakes. When they sit up in high humidity for long periods of time, they get freezer burn. Or it could get condensation and water drop. So not all flakes are particularly interesting. Often in Rochester we get what's called prisms or needles. These kind of snowflakes look like table salt. And so we could get a foot of snow, but it's as though you took a salt shaker and just dumped it on the table. There wouldn't be one redeeming flake to pursue. It's in much the same way someone goes out to explore and find something. Snowflake photography, the way I do it, is a bit of a random event. It might be that I get some good work, and it could be weeks or months where there's no really good flakes. So I'm going to do a small departure from snowflakes. I also have great interest in plants and botany and flowers, and about a decade or more ago I did a little series about flowers, plants under the microscope, and seeds. So this is a very young fern. It's called the prothallium stage. It exists in this for about a year. It's slightly larger than a rice grain. So when you think about a fern, you'd never think about it being the size of a rice grain. It doesn't have a very significant vascular system. This next series of pictures are objects that were prepared for me by a company in Rochester called Ward Scientific, another company called Carolina Biological. So for me, it's not always about having to handle the sample myself as much as it is about to create a collection of pictures around a certain subject or theme. This is what's called a 5-needle white pine. This is a ginkgo. This is part of a rye. We've all had rye bread. I kind of see a little runner maybe running. See the arms and the neck and the legs? This is a buttercup. So you can begin to see the petals and the sepals and the corolla and all the structures. So some people have described some of these pictures as almost as though they were Japanese watercolors rather than photomicrographs. Scale is completely absent from these pictures by design. I chose to make pictures like this not as science documents. If I put a ruler in it, it would be absolutely clinically accurate, but without, it can take on any sense of scale. This is a female pine cone. This is a pine seed. So this embryo is in the seed with 2 seed leaves, and it's called a radicle, or the primary root, and so it's just waiting for the conditions to germinate. This is archegonium. A male pine cone. You can see the millions of pollen grains stored waiting to be released when the seed leaves open. And aquatic, actually it's a weed called Polycyphonia. If you were here and I was with you, I'd ask you if you knew what that was. And people would guess at all kinds of things, but since you're not here and I'm here, I can tell you that's a dandelion. And the seeds are down at the bottom, and all of the little things that you would blow that would take it airborne are above it, those little translucent structures. And I think this is a particularly elegant photograph. My interests, like many of yours, are all over the place. And in April, I was approached by a large pharmaceutical company to do a commission project where they wanted to take their products and create sort of illustrations around them, but not for engineers or pharmacists, but more just based on art and creating graphical materials for annual reports or things that might be used in lobbies of buildings. And so we've all consumed pills of some sorts, and they don't look particularly any different than this. Maybe they're white or round or oval shaped or pink or blue or a millimeter or liquids. And so I take these pills and I use a razor blade. I shared I do things kind of in a primitive way. I love technology and great, very sophisticated things, but sometimes you don't need all of that to do good work. So my compounds were dissolved in supersaturated boiling water, alcohol and acetones as solvents, and then would take those materials and have them form into crystals. As I shared with you the Sordaria fimicola, those little spores, this is a picture of a chicken egg. And I use it as an example of how different things can look under different kinds of illumination. So the egg being lit from the top, the egg being lit from the side, and the egg being lit from bottom creates a completely different illustration on how something might actually look. And all three are completely accurate. So there's a huge interpretive component to making science pictures and actually doing science that people would argue with me is not true. But this picture for me is very demonstrative to that. While all three are absolutely accurate, they share one object in three completely different ways. Well, that couldn't be more true under a microscope. I have numerous ways to make one thing look completely different. And I have tools, much like an automobile has a steering wheel and an accelerator and a brake, and things I can do to make elements of the object appear. So I make my preparations. I might sort of characterize this as the debris field, right? You make a preparation, you just ground up some chemical, which was a pill, and then you've combined it with water or alcohol or acetone. And most pharmaceutical products have what's called filler and binders and a lot of material that has nothing to do except to keep the pill as a pill. The actual pharmaceutical itself is often a very tiny component. And so when I have to make these preps, I have to scan everywhere to find things that look like this. Each medicine that I photographed, and I did 51 over the summer, had somewhat of a fingerprint or something quite unique and telling about its behavior. I would make my samples in the evening, and then I'd come down in the morning and, like a kid going to the Christmas tree, see what happened. Sometimes I was terribly disappointed, and other times I just stayed there for 7 straight hours because everywhere I looked there was something particularly spectacular. Isolating objects and interesting compositions can be complicated, not technically in execution, but sort of isolating things in ways that graphically and science-wise make sense. Can't really tell you what all of the objects are at this point without referencing my notes. This is asthma medicine. This is a glaucoma medicine. You know, some pictures were complicated, some samples were simple, some didn't give me anything. This is the solvent. The pharmaceutical didn't do anything, so the solvent became more interesting than the object. But, you know, having done this kind of work nearly for 40 years now, I've come to appreciate that sometimes you don't get what you want out of it and you still try to make it work. Everything has its own sort of aesthetic, and I've been sort of rekindled. This is for any of you that take if you have hair loss, you know, a Rogaine kind of product, this is a Rogaine kind of product, as is this. I'm just going to take you through a series of pictures as we progress. I have about 5 more minutes, I believe, on my clock before we begin to take any questions, if there are any. There's one now, so why don't we take a small break and I'll answer a question.
So the question is, are these done with polarized light?
These crystals are done under polarized light with the additional element of what's called a quartz wedge, which transforms the optical properties. Quartz is kind of an interesting mineral. It occurs naturally, and if you think about plywood having the grain of the wood go 90 degrees to one another and it's layered, quartz is sort of naturally forms that way, and so it has significant refractive properties that allow me to create this sort of rainbow appearance. And what that allows these kinds of crystals to reveal is refractive properties within them that would be masked simply using polarized light. Appreciate the question. It was a good one, and I should have mentioned that. Sure. Oh, there's another question.
Then a follow-up to that is whether you're using a form of phase contrast imaging.
I do use phase, but none of the pictures that I've shown in this presentation have used phase microscopy. It's a powerful tool for a lot of applications, but more often than not, its aesthetic properties really don't inspire me to use it for any of this kind of work. But it does create great visibility in situations where objects have none. This is another glaucoma medicine. In many ways, it reminded me of snowflakes and ice crystals. This compound had these kind of, it looked like hair. All these little structural things grew hair. Every little bubble that formed had a hairy kind of appearance to it. It was just odd, as did this one. These had micro-color little fibrils that grew almost like steel wool from these little locations along the borders wherever there was a crystal formation center. So they each were very, very fascinating to me in different ways. So I've sort of decided that I'm going to do this now for the foreseeable future since this project has concluded, and I don't think I can solicit any old pills from any of you on this particular forum, but if you should happen to send me a pill, you know, I'd be happy to take a picture of it and see what it does. I've got a lot of neighbors giving me pills and relatives giving me pills, so this has borne another curiosity. So I'll probably spend summers when it's oppressive and hot in the basement doing crystals and winter in the garage taking snowflakes. So in a lot of ways, you know, I've been able to weave my life and my photography and my career all into a kind of a very harmonious sort of way, which is, I feel, just very, very fortunate that that's been how this worked out for me. We're getting near to the end of my crystals or so, I think. So we're just going to kind of go quickly for the last 5 minutes. And I hope that they're on the screen long enough for you to appreciate their intricacies and their colors and their structure. As as I say, each particular compound behaved in sort of very unique ways, almost as though it was a fingerprint for this object. But the methods to get these preparations that I used were somewhat primitive, and probably wouldn't be, the purity could always be questioned. Maybe there was impurities in other materials that snuck into each of the preps. While I tried to be certain that wasn't the case, I can't be certain that it didn't happen. Contamination of anything is a very real possibility under the microscope. Often dirt is larger than the object that you might photograph, and I will photograph more dirt than sample just as a consequence of the kind of environment that this kind of work is produced within. Ron, are there any other questions that you are receiving?
No others yet. Feel free to use the chat panel that's in the upper section of the webinar, and we will definitely get some of those answered.
So this is a component of sunscreen, and these little goblets are ultraviolet opaque, and so they're all part of sunscreens, and they have birefringent properties and in many ways look like amoebas.
So there's a question about what has surprised you most about viewing the world at such a micro level?
I'm always surprised. You know, it's just the element of surprise and the challenge to try to get good pictures out of chaos. You know, many of the things that, while they have intrinsic organizational structures, creating an illustration, a scientifically accurate one, or one that has an aesthetic properties to it. You know, you got a rectangle and you have to work within the confines of that rectangle and isolate. Sometimes that's difficult to do. So for me, you know, it's that constant, the challenge and the curiosity and having the element of surprise become a component to the picture as well as the experience.
There's a question, have you imaged with birefringence to determine stresses and translucent materials?
You know, I'm sure I have. I can't recall an absolute. In the forensic world, that's done every day by forensic scientists to try to put together and solve crimes. So I could pursue those kinds of things, look at lenses, for example, to see if they have internal stress for performances, but not as a clinical pursuit. The work I'm sharing with you today, for the most part, was created mostly for aesthetic reasons, and I took advantage of all of my knowledge and experience. This picture is a cross-section of actually a mineral. So if you can imagine taking a rock and grinding it down to about 0.4 of a millimeter so light could possibly pass. In this picture, the birefringence of each mineral is absolutely being delineated. So the lavenders and the grays and the blues are all absolutely indicative of what composition the mineral has in it, whether it's feldspars or micas or granites or schists. All of those components for a geologist become critical. I had an exhibition here in Rochester in 2000, and I took a series of 100 pictures of all of the North American minerals and made a huge wall mural of all these minerals, just in a pretty random mosaic of them, totally drawn to the architecture of how these, what are called coarse grain minerals, form and the ability to see structure.
Take a few more questions.
I absolutely would love to answer some more questions.
Have you used fluorescence microscopy in your work, and also want to know about confocal microscopy?
I do some fluorescent imaging. I haven't really tried to create any bodies of work around fluorescent phenomena. It's a very powerful tool. It's in many ways revolutionized light microscopy, and certainly confocal is a huge evolution from the fluorescence methodologies. RIT has a confocal instrument in the College of Science. I haven't really spent too much time on it, but many of my students actually do and have taken a class as well as being lab assistants in that class. So I'm very familiar with both techniques and have done imaging on the fluorescent technique for many years, but not created a body of work around it. So that concludes the actual illustrative part of my talk, and if there's more questions, I presume that's what we'll do for the duration of our time together, and I certainly appreciate your interest and attention. I presume you are interested in attending, but I can't see you. I hope you're all still awake.
So there are some more questions. Let's get to those. There's a few questions around this about whether you've exhibited any work, and that you've mentioned, your pictures resemble pieces of art. Do you sell any of your prints? What sizes?
Oh, I do sell pictures when people are persistent enough to be patient with me. A lot of my snowflakes are actually greeting cards now at the Cary Press here at RIT. In terms of exhibiting, the annual faculty show has become where I often exhibit. I've had a few solo exhibitions, but I've pursued other kinds of activities, so I don't really have too many shows per se, but if someone were inclined or interested in any of my pictures, I would be happy to entertain a conversation with you about that.
There's a question about what motivated you to take pictures at such a microscopic level.
Well, I always wonder that myself. I took this biology, when I went to school in 1974, I was 18 like many of you, and my mom and dad wanted me to be a doctor. And so, I love photography. I learned about photography by accident in high school with a friend who was the yearbook photography editor and did the school newspaper work, and I tagged along with him for quite some time and developed film, and I was hooked. But going to college for photography wasn't in the cards. When I got to school, I had my camera with me every day. It was almost as though I had a necklace or jewelry. People didn't recognize me if I didn't have my camera, and that was fine because I just wanted to take pictures of everything. And I took pictures of dissections of cats, and I took pictures of anything I could, petri dishes, test tubes. And so after I graduated from school, I tried to find my way into the field of medical photography. It was a difficult time in 1982. The economy was awful. People were gas rationing. If you had even license plates or odd license plates, it was the day you could go get gas. And so I went to work in science, healthcare, medical. I loved microscopy from the time I used microscopes, and while working at West Virginia University, I went to the pathology department as often as I could and made personal micrographs there and did brown bag lunch seminars with the doctors. When I moved to Detroit, where I worked at Henry Ford Hospital, similarly, my first point of departure from the audiovisual services was to run to the pathology department where the microscopes lived and volunteer my services to them, and created some synergies there. And when I came to RIT, there wasn't anybody teaching light microscopy, and being in an art college, all of those things just sort of lined up for me. I was able to work in an area that was just visually of great curiosity, and every day, whatever you look at, you're going to see something you haven't observed ever, and each object has its own unique set of characteristics and structures that make it challenging yet interesting sometimes. I mean, not everything is interesting. Blood cells by themselves they look like little red flying saucers. They're not particularly interesting, but certainly life-giving and have other components that make them important. But personal work has been motivated by people's reaction to seeing the invisible, and like anybody that makes something, you want validation that it's worthwhile to pursue. And so I've continually got more validation. So I turned into a bit of a monster.
There's a question about how would you suggest that one could start doing this with students or children? What equipment would you look for that was reasonably priced?
Well, I presume you're talking about snowflakes. Each object that you might try to photograph is going to create sort of possibly a different equipment requirement. Snowflakes, you're going to have to get some kind of magnification. If you can get a powerful magnifying glass and then use your smartphone, you can photograph with the magnifying glass in front of the smartphone. Or a jeweler's loupe is another tool that you could get for not a lot of investment. Isolating the object, holding the camera in such a way that you don't introduce vibration. You know, in the world of magnification, even the tiniest vibration makes images that look like they were made during an earthquake. A magnification gets amplified by a magnification. So 10x, if there's a little magnification, it's 10 times magnified. And vibration creates softness, and softness leads to blurriness, and blurriness makes it not very effective. So it's a perpetual process of eliminating vibration, optically using inexpensive magnifying glasses, or even go get some of those cheap reading glasses, the highest diopter that they would sell. Hold them. You're going to need some kind of you could use a soup can with the hanger and tape the lens on the hanger on the soup can to get everything in the right focal length for each of the lenses to operate properly. For any of you that are on the internet, there's a kind of interesting little company that's making a plexiglass holder for iPhones and enable you to photograph using the iPhone at low magnifications, 1 and 2x. For those that are inclined to want to spend a little money, Canon makes a 65 millimeter macro lens that will do 5 times magnification by itself. It's a $1,000 lens, so it's not inexpensive. Going to CVS or some other pharmaceutical store for reading glasses is significantly cheaper, but optically they're not going to do particularly great photographs, but they lead you to something that can be great fun for young people to learn, at least without being overly concerned with reaching the highest optical performances.
Have you imaged any semiconductor materials at all?
I do a lot of material sciences imaging. I've done some work for counterfeiting, for printers, for people that do welding. So, I mean, really, the microscope is a tool that's ubiquitous to all disciplines. It's used everywhere. So once you sort of figure out how to use the microscope and do microscopy, anything can be looked at it. And in the semiconductor industry, it's a powerful tool used here in the electrical engineering department. Micro-E at RIT has a huge imaging component, and often I will go over and borrow wafers for pieces for students to learn a bit about and the kinds of microscopy that's most effective for seeing the channels and the circuits and the soldering and all those things that make those powerful ingredients to the world that we live in.
And there's a bunch of comments just saying how beautiful your work. One person on the webinar says he performs scientific photomicrography, part of his work at the University of Rochester, and has had over 30 years of experience, and just says your artistic twist on the subject is beautiful and inspiring.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. Maybe we should have coffee since you're just down the river.
So, any other last questions before we wrap up the webinar? Well, I don't see any. So with that, additional questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to Professor Paris. Note that all participants will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording. Thank you to Michael for being our distinguished speaker today, and many thanks to our RIT alumni for joining us for today's webinar. We thank you for taking time out of your busy workday to be with us. Make sure to join us for the Spring 2014 Me RIT webinar series. By popular demand, Me RIT webinars will now be presented twice a month. Spring presenters include Andy Phelps, Professor and Director of the RIT Center for Media, Arts, Games, Interaction, and Creativity, otherwise known as MAGIC. RIT Professor Emeritus Frank Romano, who will speak on the future of print. And alumnus David Smith, co-author of Workforce of One, will share insights into today's Workforce of One and how to respond to the diverse needs of individual employees. Look for an upcoming email invitation to join in these engaging conversations and more. Thanks again for joining us. Please exit the webinar by going to File, Leave Event, and have a great day.